News when you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Amy Morris. President Trump has expressed frustration with allies who've been unwilling to help the U.S. war effort, telling them to, quote, go get your own oil, suggesting on social media they buy from the U.S. or build up courage to get it themselves. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says diplomatic talks to end the conflict with Iran are gaining strength, and the U.S. military's job is to maintain pressure and compel Tehran to make a deal. At a Pentagon briefing, Hegseth says many of Iran's troops are deserting, and its leaders are frustrated.
Our strikes are damaging the morale of the Iranian military, leading to widespread desertions, key personnel shortages, and causing frustrations amongst senior leaders.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, sources tell Bloomberg Christine Lagarde, challenged Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's optimism that the war in Iran's economic fallout will be short-lived. The president of the European Central Bank told Bessent and other G7 officials that the effects of the war would be felt for a long time because so much has already been destroyed. Warren Buffett warns that he's seeing signs of fragility emerging in the banking system as it has become more connected to non-bank players, telling CNBC that if panic sweeps through the markets, many investors will likely head for the exits, and that this should be a priority for the Fed. The 95-year-old Buffett recently stepped down as CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. Job openings fell and hiring slowed notably in February, pointing to cooler labor demand before the war in Iran triggered additional uncertainty. The Labor Department says vacancies decreased to 6.88 million from an upwardly revised 7.24 million in January. The pullback in openings was driven by declines in accommodation and food services, healthcare and social assistance, and manufacturing. Wall Street is ending a volatile March with gains in stocks and bonds on a news report that the president would be willing to end the war in Iran, even with the Strait of Hormuz largely closed. We do check those markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 1.4%, NASDAQ up 1.8%, the Dow up 1.1%, the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.32%, and the 2-year yield at 3.79%. WTI now at $104 per barrel, Brent crude at $107 a barrel, and Bitcoin is up about 0.5%, near $67,000. U.S. consumer confidence unexpectedly rose in March on slightly more upbeat views of business and labor market conditions. But the Conference Board's senior U.S. economist Yelena Shilyacheva says there's more to that data.
There was a spike in comments about oil and gas and war and conflict measures. There was a spike in inflation expectations. So sometimes you just look under the hood and the other measures in the survey are telling us that consumers are very concerned.
A measure of expectations for the next 6 months fell in March to 70.9. A gauge of present conditions rose. Consumer confidence remains subdued compared to recent years as consumers remain cautious about job prospects and inflation. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says preparations for President Trump's meeting with Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping are on track after the high-profile summit was postponed to May amid the war in Iran. Greer believes relations between the U.S. and China are getting better.
We don't see a need to change our policy. The Chinese want stability. We want stability. I actually see a positive agenda with China going forward where we learn to manage our trade with each other. I see stability with China over the next year.
Trade Representative Jamieson Greer spoke exclusively on Bloomberg Surveillance. NVIDIA says it invested $2 billion in Marvell Technology, part of an agreement to collaborate on silicon photonics to make AI services more affordable. Shares of NVIDIA jumped more than 3%. Shares of Marvell jumped about 8%. Unilever has agreed to combine its food business with spice maker McCormick in a $44.8 billion deal, creating a global seasoning, sauces, and condiments company. The combined company will have revenue of about $20 billion. Bloomberg Intelligence senior equity analyst Diana Gomes says the merger makes sense, but there are risks.
It is a really transformational deal for McCormick. It is quite a sizable group of assets that they are taking in, so the execution risk is quite high, and it's going to be a much more complex organization.
And that's why shares of Unilever are about 7% lower and McCormick shares are more than 5% lower. The Supreme Court has ruled against a Colorado law that bans conversion therapy for LGBTQ plus kids, siding with a Christian counselor who argues the law violates the First Amendment. The court agreed the law raises free speech concerns and sent it back to a lower court to decide if it meets a legal standard. King Charles III will visit Washington, D.C. next month, April 27th through the 30th. The visit has sparked some controversy. Some British politicians are calling for it to be postponed in protest over President Trump's criticisms. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.